Alright, G'day IB Psychology students. If you are doing Glanzer and Cunitz, the serial position effect, primacy effect, recency effect, whatever you want to call it, if you're doing that for your IA or you're thinking about doing it for your IA, then I really recommend you watch this video carefully because I'm going to explain some of the common mistakes students make and how you can avoid making those mistakes. So the classic, the major tips are focus on one effect. We're going to talk about your IV and your DV, how to operationally define those variables, the model or theory that you should link it to and how you can link it to that theory, as well as the word list. A couple of important points to remember here. So in this video, I want to explain these 5 major errors and also the major tips and how you can avoid making those errors. Alright, so first of all, now this is the most important one. Choose one effect. Focus on the primacy effect or the recency effect. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly which one to do, but it should be pretty obvious. And I'll make it pretty obvious which one you need to do. In fact, it's going to be really hard not to tell you the right one to do. Let's have a look. This comes from the original study. Now notice how this is our primacy effect, right? The words tend to be remembered best at the start of the list. And then the recency effect here is they tend to be remembered better at the end. However, with the delay, 10 seconds or 30 seconds, the recency effect disappears. You want to investigate. You don't want to have both conditions or hypothesize that both conditions are going to be the same, right? You want to hypothesize that there's going to be an effect and that there's going to be differences in 2 conditions. Pretty obvious which one you should do, right? Okay, so remember, it's really important that you remember that your independent variable is not the recency effect or the primacy effect. Okay, it's an effect, not a cause. The cause of it is the delay, and you have to understand why that delay causes this particular effect, or actually why the delay causes the disappearance of the effect. Right? You know which one now you're gonna have to do. Right? Okay. Cool. All right. This is really, really important. So now we're thinking about your independent variables. So we know that it's the delay and no delay. They are the 2 conditions, right? So one group is going to be the immediate free recalls after 0 seconds, and then I would suggest you narrow this down into 2 conditions, right? So don't do all 3. That makes things complicated. So you might just have 0 seconds and 30 seconds. Now that's your independent variable. Immediate recall, delayed recall. Your dependent variable are the words recalled. Now we're going to talk about that more in the next tip about operationalizing your dependent variables, right? So so hopefully that's clear, right? You have to make sure that your independent variable is not the primacy or recency effect, right? It's the delay, no delay. So how do we operationalize your definitions? Let's first focus on the independent variable, but just bear in mind I've got another video that explains this in more detail, so you can find that on our YouTube channel. But you have the delay, which is the immediate free recall, and the time delay free recall. Okay, so that is your independent variable. Now you have to specify exactly how much time. That's one way you're going to operationalize the delay, no delay. The second thing is you might summarize either in your hypothesis or somewhere to operationalize that variable. What are they doing during the delay? That's really important, right? There's some sort of distraction task they must do. They can't just wait for 30 seconds because that defeats the purpose. Remember, the whole purpose of the delay is that they are doing something to distract themselves so they can't rehearse the information. And we're going to explain more about that in a moment. So your dependent variable, again, remembering which one are you doing, right? You're doing one of them. You're not going to compare all the words in the list. This is a really common mistake that students make, where they just have a bar graph and they find the average out of all 15 words. That's not investigating an effect. Okay, because look at the delay, there's no hypothesis here that would assume that there'll be a difference across the 2 conditions. The effect is really only existing in, let's say, the last, 3 words, the last 3 words, or you might say because there's 15, you might divide it into groups of 3, the first 5, this will be the beginning, the middle, and the end. So to operationalize your dependent variable, you have to choose very carefully, right, which words are being recalled. Right? So if you think about the recency, what does recency mean? And now you can choose. Does it mean the last word, the last 2? Right? The last 5 kind of makes sense to me. And then the second thing to bear in mind with operationalizing this is how are they recalling it? So you can't be, it's hard to be too specific when writing operational definitions. So you think, are they doing it by just, you can say written recall, verbal recall, or are they identifying it? Now you're probably doing free recall where they just write down on a piece of paper, and so you can just say, through written free recall. Okay, and that's a good way to make sure that you're operationalizing that variable. Okay, I hope you're with me so far. Number 4 is the model or theory. Now, how do you link it to this? Now, it's really hard to do this if you're making the mistakes that we've outlined earlier. If you haven't clearly identified what the recency effect is, what you're testing, if you're not really sure what your independent variable is, then trying to link that to the model or theory becomes really difficult. But if you have, you should know that the multi-store model of memory is the theory or model that we're linking to with the primacy and recency effect. Now this is really good because if you're doing this for your AA, you can also use this as the study that you're going to use to support this if this question comes up in the exams. So there are 2 ways you can link these 2 things together. Let me just get rid of my face here. Okay, so there are 2 ways you can link this. First of all, you could use the multi-store model to explain why this disappears. Right? And now you're using this model to explain this effect. And that's really what you should be doing in your AA. You use the background theory or model to explain the phenomenon or the effect that you are investigating. And so if we see here, why does this effect disappear because of the 30-second time delay? Well, it's to do with this idea of rehearsal. That if you block someone's rehearsal, after 30 seconds, that information hasn't been able to transfer to the long-term memory. And also, 30 seconds is longer than the duration of our short-term memory. So it's no longer in our short-term memory, and it hasn't been able to be rehearsed to the long-term memory. That's also why the primacy effect doesn't disappear, because as these other words are being read out during this time, the participant has they have the time to be able to rehearse. So this, even with the delayed recall, the earlier words they're rehearsing as the words are being read out. And so that information is being transferred to the long-term memory. So the first words are stored in the long-term memory regardless of which condition. And again, this is why you want to focus on one effect, right? I just winked and didn't realize my camera was turned off. Anyway, so we got that, right? So you could use the multi-store model and use the specific terminology, right? The rehearsal, short-term memory, long-term memory, or short-term store, long-term store. And you're saying that with the inability to rehearse, the information can't be transferred to the short-term store to the long-term store. And then you can say how this supports that model. Now, the other way you could do is you could use a serial position effect to demonstrate the multi-store model of memory. Now, I haven't actually written this down out in detail. This could actually end up being the same thing, but I don't think so. If you begin with saying, okay, this is the primacy effect and the recency effect, and then you'd say, why does this happen? And again, for the same reasons I was just explaining. You say, well, according to the multi-store model of memory, information has to be rehearsed in order for it to transfer to the long-term store. This is why the recency effect information transfers. Or this is why the recency effect occurs, because that information transfers to the long-term store because people rehearse it while the words are being read out. Now, you could argue why is the recency effect here, again, because it's this information here gets transferred to the long-term store. This information here is immediately available in the short-term store. Okay. Whereas, and again, you can use this explain why the delay occurs and use that to support the multi-store model of memory as well. Either way, you must be explaining why these effects occur using the model, and importantly, explaining why the disappearance of the recency effect occurs. Again, using the background theory of the model. Okay, now finally, this is a minor one, but it is really important. It can be really helpful, is the word list. So one of the biggest mistakes in the IA, especially in the exploration, is the choice of materials not being explained. Now this slide's taken from another video I made that outlined the top 5 mistakes in the exploration for the IA. When you're explaining your materials, pens, pencils, desks, that generic stuff, don't explain that. Don't waste your words on that. You want to explain what materials did you use to manipulate your independent variable and measure your dependent variable, as well as your ethical considerations, informed consent, debriefing, etc. Now, if we think about what materials did you use to measure your dependent variable, pen and paper, so there's not a lot to explain there. However, one thing you did use to sort of test your, and also to measure, I guess we can count this to measure it, is your word list, right? You chose 15 words, or you're going to choose 15 words. What words have you chosen, or are you going to choose? How are you going to choose them, and why? I'm getting mixed up between past and present because I don't know if you've conducted it already or if you're going to conduct it, but regardless, you have to explain the choice of materials. So, did you use, for example, did you use the same words as in the original study? Did you maybe you chose an online random list generator? Maybe you just decided to do all adjectives. Maybe you decided to do just one syllable words. Maybe it was country names. They were all familiar or they were in a different language. What was it and why? As much as possible, stick to what they did in the original, even if it's not the specific words but the general methodology. Or if you are going to change something, again, you have to have a specific reason why. This is something that very few students explain, but it's a really important material that you're using. Yeah, and when you come to the explaining your materials for the study, there's not a lot really to explain, right? You have a delay or no delay, so how do you manipulate that? It's pretty easy. You tell them to wait, then you give them a sum to figure out. Not a lot to do there. And how they actually physically, it's not like you're doing a memory, like an emotion test or a mood test or some sort of questionnaire. It's just write down the words. So it's really important that you take the time to think carefully about the word list you chose and explain it. Right, now to review the other big tips. Now, I've written this all out in a blog post as well, which I'll link in the description, and there's a couple more added there, but they're just minor ones. In fact, the one I can think of is, and this goes for a lot of any IA, don't call them Group 1 and Group 2, Condition 1, Condition 2, Group A, Group B. Just call them Delay Group, No Delay Group, right? Or the IFR, DFR. Give your conditions a name, so as we're reading them as examiners, we don't have to keep going, wait, what was their condition A again? What was their condition B? If you say, in the delay condition, this happened. In the immediate free recall condition, this, it makes so much more sense. It's just a little, maybe an examiner pet peeve of mine. So review, focus on one effect. You know which one. Your independent variable is the delay, no delay. It's not the primacy recency effect. That's not your independent variable. You're testing the disappearance of the effect, right? When you're not allowed to, when there's a delay, and you're not allowed to recall the words. Don't compare all the words across both conditions with 15. Figure out just 5 words, okay? And it's probably going to be the last 5, right? If you're doing the effect that I'm strongly recommending that you do. Use the multi-source model to explain the disappearance of the effect and why those effects occur in the first place, and that's going to link your investigation to the background theory or model. And then you can explain your word list. Really hope that was hopeful. I really hope that was helpful, and you do well on your AA. If you've got questions, pop them down in the comments, and also again, the blog post is there if you prefer to see the stuff written out. Just a reminder, we've just bundled together our ebook for the IA with the teacher support pack. So if you're a teacher watching this, or you want to tell your teacher if you're a student this might be helpful for them, everything is there. And yep, YouTube channel, blog, lots of other stuff on the store, etc., etc. Thanks. Good luck.